To this day, I've never really been drunk. I don't drink. I will occasionally drink, but my childhood trauma and alcoholism running through my family definitely informs part of that. But for me, I realized I had my own anger issues and I've had to spend my entire adult life dealing with those because it wasn't just the abuse, but also growing up in the high school I did, it was kind of kill or be killed. So I got into a lot of altercations. I got into physical fights in high school and I saw it as a defense mechanism, but that carried over into adult life. And I had to make a choice and say, I don't want to live life as an angry person. I don't want to be my father. I think that's why he dropped dead of a heart attack at 51. And it's scary because I'm not that far off from that age now. And I don't want to have that life. I don't want to be that person. And I have built a life with intention to not be that way.
Wow. You mentioned you didn't want to be that way. You mentioned you wanted to break the stigma that's attached to not completing high school, not going to college, being trapped like a hamster in a cage, going to school, having to fight for, for the killed or be killed. What was when you mentioned your father, and this isn't a show about your father, this is to let the people know what you had to go through with an addiction and to break that particular narrative. How close were you to his parents? Because you mentioned this is something that's been going on and on and on and on. So was this something that you witnessed even going to outside family members' locations and functions?
So, my saving grace of my childhood were my grandparents. I was blessed to have an amazing grandmother on my mother's side, but unfortunately, she passed away when I was younger. And then I had amazing grandparents on my dad's side, amazing to the extent that they could be. My grandfather also struggled with alcoholism. Pretty much every man in my family almost universally has struggled with alcoholism. But my grandmother is a blessing. She's still here, thankfully. I consider her one of my absolute best friends. We are extremely close. And, I have never questioned her of, did you try to intervene in terms of breaking that abuse? I am absolutely certain she had conversations with him, but I do know that she was always my support net. And I know I wouldn't be here today without that because when my dad was having a really bad episode, at one point he burned our childhood house down. He literally burned it down. She was always there, and I would spend large periods of time with her. And then things were so bad at certain points where I actually went and lived with her for several years. And that was the only moment in my life that I kind of knew some degree of peace. It wasn't completely peaceful because my grandfather also had his issues, but it was the most peaceful time that I knew. But it was interesting because they live in a rural part of Kentucky and I grew up in the urban core. And so to have that culture shock of growing up in an urban environment and now to be on a literal farm where you don't walk down the street to the corner market. You can't just, walk to your friend's house. It was very isolating and very shocking and created kind of this dichotomy of country versus city. And so I craved that urban core. I missed that. And so I lived with them for a few years. My dad got his act somewhat together. He would get sober, fall off the wagon. He followed that cycle for a long time until finally it did stick. Like I said, toward my senior year of high school. But yeah, I'm very grateful for my grandparents and especially my grandmother because she was really that one stable part of my life. And then my older sister, she was 2 years older than me. She went through the same thing. She chose not to live with our grandparents. So we were separated there for a while, but we always had each other as a built in support system. And I'm very thankful for that.